Naruto and Sasuke didn't fight in the Fourth Great Ninja War just to win a battle. They fought to end the cycle. The same cycle that orphaned them, scarred them, and turned children into weapons before they even knew what peace felt like. Naruto wanted to protect the future.
But still, I do know what friends are, and I want to protect them.
Sasuke wanted to dismantle the past.
What I'm talking about, it's revolution.
Two different answers to the same question. How do you change a world that feeds on the lives of kids and calls it order? Now contrast that with Sakazuki, the current fleet admiral of the Navy. Akainu doesn't just enforce the world government's rule, he embodies it. Absolute justice, no compromise, no mercy. A man so dedicated that he's willing to burn the world to preserve the lie it's built on.
If we're doing this, we have to be thorough. If even one of those scholars had managed to sneak on board that ship, then all the sacrifices we made today would be in vain.
While Naruto and Sasuke fought to rewrite the rules, Akainu fights to ensure no one ever questions them. So let's shift the world a bit. Forget Kaguya, forget the Otsutsuki. What if, to truly break the cycle, the final obstacle wasn't an alien goddess, but rather the ultimate enforcer of a corrupt world order? Well, in today's video, that's exactly what we'll find out. So before we even dive into the scaling like strength and speed, I think one of the most important aspects of this versus matchup is whether or not Naruto and Sasuke can even interact with Akainu physically. The reason for this is when people talk about Logia users like Akainu in One Piece, there's a common misconception that they're always intangible unless you're using Haki. But this idea doesn't really hold up under scrutiny, because I'd argue that Logia Intangibility isn't even passive. Rather, it's something the user must consciously activate, typically by reacting in time to an incoming attack. In fact, almost every time a Logia user phases through an attack, they also appear to react to it beforehand. This heavily implies that the intangibility is not automatic. It's a defensive ability that requires awareness and reaction speed. A perfect example of this comes from the Alabasta arc, when Luffy surprises both Smoker and Ace at the bar, with neither of them phasing through his tackle as he crashes into Smoker mid-conversation with Ace. Now, some people try to dismiss this scene as a quote-unquote gag, like how Nami punches Luffy and hurts him, but that doesn't apply here. Nami's punches are explicitly played for comedy and are said to only hurt Luffy emotionally, not physically. By contrast, the Smoker and Ace scene is contextual, consistent, and supported by the story's internal logic, making it pretty clear that these two instances aren't the same. We see another strong example of this when Frankie physically grabs Caribou the Swamp Logia without using Haki. Not only was Frankie able to do it multiple times, but he even comments that this kind of thing should only be possible with Haki, despite being able to do the same thing without it. That said, some fans will try to counter this by pointing to Apu failing to damage Kizaru despite him supposedly being caught off guard, but if you actually look at the scene, Kizaru clearly sees and acknowledges Apu before the attack lands, meaning it's likely Kizaru used observation Haki to sense Apu's intent, which allowed him to activate his Logia powers in time. One of the last counter-arguments I've seen against my stance is the claim that Enel was apparently intangible even while asleep. But this is a complete misread. Since Enel wakes up just before being stabbed, and more importantly he's using observation Haki to monitor the entire island constantly. He wasn't asleep and unaware, he was alert, aware, and therefore able to react. So putting it all together, it's pretty clear that Logia users must actively react to become intangible. If they're caught off guard or blitzed by a faster opponent, they can be hit, even without Haki. So when addressing how Akainu's Logia Intangibility is going to interact with both Naruto and Sasuke physically, it's all going to come down to whether both characters are fast enough to blitz Akainu's reactions. Which is why the next topic we'll have to address is speed. Moving into speed, there's a lot to unpack, so I'll start with Akainu since his scaling is more straightforward than Naruto and Sasuke's. According to Databook Grand World, the admirals are directly implied to be relative to each other in overall combat ability, which includes speed. So even though Kizaru is typically considered the fastest admiral, Akainu should still scale to the vast majority of his speed feats, with the possible exception of Kizaru's fully accelerated light speed kick. So how fast is Kizaru then? A lot of people wonder about this, but the answer is surprisingly simple. The reason I say this is because we actively see Kizaru combating Rayleigh, the same Rayleigh who not only intercepted Kizaru's light speed kick, but also cut him off mid-transport when he tried to pursue the Straw Hats as a beam of light. Therefore, if Kizaru is consistently shown to be trading blows with someone like that, then logically he's fighting at FTL speeds too. This means that Akainu, who scales relative to Kizaru, also operates in the FTL combat range, and his magma-based attacks would logically move at comparable speeds to Kizaru's light. Now, I already know some of you are going to say I'm lowballing here, but honestly I don't think I am, and here's why. A huge part of the One Piece community believes that just because Luffy and Zoro were able to dodge light speed projectiles relatively early in the series, that means they must have gotten millions of times faster over time just to keep up with new opponents. But that logic is flawed, because neither pre-Wano Zoro nor Luffy were ever truly blitzed by any major opponent, yet people act like Luffy constantly gets overwhelmed and only catches up mid-fight. But if you actually go back and look at what happens during these chapters, in most cases he's matching speed right from the beginning against opponents like Doflamingo and Katakuri. And don't even get me started on the whole gear multiplier argument. Because as I've explained countless times by now, even though we have vague quantifications like Daruki and Doflamingo several times statements, assigning fixed multipliers to gear 2 or 4 just doesn't work. If we took these static multipliers seriously, then enemies would be dozens of times stronger and faster than base Luffy, and should logically be able to one-shot him instantly, but don't. Why? Because that's not how One Piece power progression actually works. The gears aren't just numbers, they're fluid enhancements. So no, Akainu would not be massively faster than light based solely on Luffy or Zoro being able to dodge light, and then upscaling from that point infinitely based on multipliers. But with that being said, I already know what some of you are thinking. This guy doesn't believe in multipliers, and he doesn't even know Katakuri fodderized Ichiji who outran his own light beams. So there's no way Akainu isn't massively faster than light. First off, whether Ichiji's beams are real light or not is its own debate. But even setting that aside, I don't get how people consider this a combat speed feat in the first place. Because all Ichiji is doing when using this named attack is running fast while launching energy beams. He's not punching, reacting, or exchanging blows. He's just moving quickly in a straight line. That's travel speed, not combat speed. And even if I ignored this distinction entirely, where's the proof that Katakuri scales to this attack? We never see Katakuri actively keeping up with Ichiji, reacting to his beams, or doing anything to establish a comparison. All we see is him avoiding an unnamed attack using Future Sight. Therefore, saying things like Katakuri and by extension Akainu upscale massively from the faster than light Ichiji is just complete headcanon that's not supported by any evidence in the story. With that out of the way, the last thing I want to touch on are the FTL pixel calcs that pop up around characters like Luffy and Kizaru, especially during the Egghead arc, with results ranging from 10 times to 20 times the speed of light. Now, I know that for the better part of my YouTube career that I've been using pixel calcs as my go-to argument, but lately I've come to realize that while pixel scaling isn't totally invalid, it's definitely flawed, especially for speed scaling. But why though? Well, simply put, because the measurement inconsistency and variance is too high. You can have 5 different calcs from the same scene, and they'll all give wildly different results depending on how people interpret the panel, the angle, the distance, the motion blur, or even how literal you're being with the perspective. When it comes to AP, pixel scaling might be a necessary evil if you don't have much else to work with, but for speed, it just gets too messy. That's why I've started leaning on scaling logic more. Because in my opinion, you don't need to cherry pick calcs or do mental gymnastics when top tiers like Akainu can already be slotted into the FTL tier through scaling from Kizaru and Rayleigh, which is the exact tier of speed we'll be placing Akainu in for the purposes of this video. With Akainu out of the way though, we can now start discussing Naruto and Sasuke's speed, which as I mentioned before is far more complicated. This is mostly because a lot of Naruto fans have either been misinformed about certain statements in scaling, or just flat out lied to when it comes to how fast these characters really are. So what I'm going to do is walk through each commonly cited Lightspeed Naruto feat or statement and break down how it actually scales to Naruto and Sasuke, if at all. Let's start off with one of the most common claims in the fandom, which usually goes as follows. Haku could move between his mirrors at the speed of light. Sasuke with only a 2-Tomo Sharingan was able to react to him. Naruto and KN0 even stopped him from returning to his mirror. So this must mean Naruto and Sasuke were light speed as early as part 1, right? Well, not quite. This logic is flawed on multiple levels, and it completely ignores the actual context of how Haku's technique works. First off, the original manga already suggests the mirrors are light speed due to their mechanics, not Haku's physical speed. The line "hold my image" in the scan on screen refers to the reflections, which yes, move at the speed of light. This is where the light speed claim originates from, but people often ignore the context of how the technique's speed relates to Naruto and Sasuke. The reason I say this is because it's stated multiple times both in the manga and supplementary material that Haku was holding back, even after activating the ice mirrors. This matters because the ice mirrors drain chakra rapidly, meaning the longer the technique is active, the slower it becomes. Haku was not only not fighting at full speed, he was also progressively weakening as the battle went on. And in the Innocent Heart Demonic Blood novel, it's literally stated that Sasuke once thought Haku was moving at the speed of light, but by the end of the fight he considered him slow, even while using the mirrors. So by the time Naruto outspeeds Haku in KN0, Haku was nowhere near light speed, and his technique had slowed down significantly, making it very clear that neither Naruto nor Sasuke had light speed combat ability at this point in the story. The next statement I want to address is a commonly cited entry from Data Book 1, which claims that Anbu members move as fast as light. However, this is a textbook example of a misused and mistranslated source. As you can see from the scan currently on screen, the version most frequently circulated in the Naruto community is a Chinese scan that was translated into English, and it completely misrepresents what the original Japanese text actually says. What the data book really states is that the Anbu's deadly techniques are like a flash of light, referring to how quickly and effectively they execute their missions. It's a simile, not a literal speed statement. So no, the Anbu aren't light speed. That claim is just another example of a flavorful line being taken way too literally. Another great example of this kind of misunderstanding is the statement regarding the double lariat, which claims the Raikage rushes forward almost at the speed of light. A lot of people take this at face value and argue that since Naruto blitzes the Raikage in KCM1, he must be faster than light, making Sasuke FTL by extension as well. But once again, this whole argument is based on a mistranslation. The original Japanese uses the phrase Hikari no Gotokai, which literally means light-like speed, not actual light speed. The kanji Gotokai is part of a family of simile phrases, often used for poetic comparisons like his gaze was like a piercing flame. In other words, it's describing something similar to light, not claiming that it's light speed. So no, the Raikage is not canonically light speed, and by extension, neither Naruto nor Sasuke would be faster than light just for scaling off of him. Speaking of Cloud Ninja though, the next meta we need to address is the Laser Circus scaling, which has been thrown around for years as a supposed proof of light speed characters in Naruto. For those of you who don't already know, Gale-style Laser Circus is stated in Data Book 3 to be composed of light rays, and we've seen it used in combat alongside lower tier characters like 5th Gate Lee. So the logic goes, if Lee can move as fast as the light rays, and Naruto and Sasuke scale far above him, then Naruto and Sasuke must be faster than light via upscaling. That sounds like pretty solid logic, until you actually break it down. The biggest problem with this scaling is that it presupposes the beams move at the speed of light just because they're called light rays. But light rays don't mean light speed unless very specific criteria are met. According to widely accepted standards for fictional light speed feats like those used on sites like Versus Battle Wiki, for a laser to be considered light speed they must fit a few of the following criteria. 1. Be explicitly stated to move at light speed by a reliable source. 2. Come from a real light source like the sun, a laser, or lightning. 3. Exhibit realistic light behavior, i.e. reflecting off mirrors, refracting through water, or traveling in a straight line. Now, I don't know if you guys have caught on yet, but the Laser Circus fails to meet any of these criteria. There's no statement that the jutsu travels at the speed of light, The jutsu itself is chakra-based, not generated from any real-world light source, and the beams curve and zigzag mid-fight, which light doesn't do unless it's being bent through a medium, which isn't happening here. So while it's true that the data book describes the laser circus as light rays, they don't move at light speed. At best, it's poetic phrasing, at worst, it's completely meaningless in terms of speed scaling. So using this feat to scale Naruto and Sasuke to light speed is just another example of reaching too far with vague wording, making this entire argument invalid for any serious scaling discussion. Now, while I know that I've spent the last few minutes breaking down why most of the so-called light speed statements in Naruto are either mistranslations or taken out of context, there are two techniques that stand out as legitimate exceptions. Both of these jutsu are verbatim stated to move at the speed of light, and that's undisputable based on the grammar and structure used in the raw Japanese scans. So yes, these attacks are genuinely described as light speed. But there's a catch. You see, neither technique scales to Naruto or Sasuke's combat and reaction speed. Let's start off with Itachi's water-style bullet jutsu. While we know that the projectiles themselves are said to move at the speed of light, all we actually see is Kakashi reacting to and blocking them with a water wall. And even though that does suggest a high level of reaction speed, it doesn't prove that Kakashi or anyone else in that tier can consistently fight at that speed. Furthermore, Kakashi was never portrayed as someone being heavily outsped by most characters, aside from Haku early in the series or characters way beyond his level late in the war. So using one isolated reaction speed feat to argue for light speed combat scaling across the verse is a massive reach. It's not just the water bullets either. The same logic applies to Sasuke's Kirin. Since while it's true that the Kirin does move at the speed of light, we don't see any meaningful reaction scaling tied to it. Yes, Itachi perceives Kirin before it hits, but that doesn't mean he reacted to it or moved at light speed. It simply shows that he was aware of it coming and had already prepared his counter beforehand with Susanoo. So even if Itachi saw the attack coming and managed to shield himself to some degree, we can't use this as definitive evidence for Itachi being able to fight at light speed. Therefore, while these jutsu are legitimately described as moving at the speed of light, their connection to Naruto and Sasuke's actual combat or reaction speed is tenuous at best. Now for the final, and in my opinion best speed meta in the entire series, we have Naruto dodging Madara's Light Fang at point blank range. This feat is extremely impressive because the Light Fang is not only stated to move at the speed of light, but it also travels in a straight line, unlike techniques like Darui's laser circus which curve, removing any ambiguity about whether the jutsu is light speed. This means Naruto either has near light speed or faster than light reaction speed, and when you factor in techniques like Chidori and Susanoo arrows, it becomes clear that Sasuke is either capable of matching Naruto's reaction speed or outright exceeding it. It's also important to remember that Chidori is a literal speed enhancer and that Sasuke uses it religiously. And every time he does, Naruto is still able to keep up, often countering with Rasengan in direct clashes, which implies that Naruto's combat speed scales to Chidori amplified Sasuke, with the same logic applying to their chakra avatars, as they represent the absolute peak of both characters' power and are still used in fast-paced combat without any loss in speed scaling. And while this absolutely means they're fast enough to tag Akainu or avoid his attacks, blitzing his Logia Intangibility is an entirely different matter. That's why next, instead of diving straight into attack potency which is useless against Logias without Haki, we need to explore other ways Naruto and Sasuke could actually damage Akainu without relying on physical contact alone. Now, when it comes to abilities Naruto and Sasuke have that don't rely on conventional force, there's an entire arsenal to choose from. Starting with Sasuke, the first jutsu that comes to mind as a counter to Akainu's Logia Intangibility is Amaterasu. Why? Because in One Piece it's canon that Akainu's magma was hot enough to burn fire itself, allowing for the Admiral to bypass Ace's Logia Intangibility. Now if we apply that same logic to Amaterasu, which is described as being as hot as the sun, with the sun being over 5 times hotter than magma, it's easy to see why I think this technique could be effective. Especially when you consider that Sasuke has multiple Inferno-style variants of Amaterasu that he can even incorporate into both his Susanoo and Chidori, giving him a variety of offensive and defensive options he can incorporate mid-battle despite Akainu being a Logia. That said, I'll talk more about how effective flame control would actually be against Akainu in the closing section of the video. For now, I just wanted to establish that yes, Amaterasu is a viable option against the Admiral. Now, even though I probably should have brought this up first, yes, Genjutsu is also on the table. But because of how overpowered hypnosis is even within Naruto's own story, I'm going to hold off on that discussion until the end. Outside of Genjutsu and Amaterasu, the next ability I could see potentially working on Akainu would be Sasuke's Rinnegan-based gravity manipulation. Because even if Akainu is made of magma, there's no indication he's immune to being crushed or restrained by massive terrain-based pressure. And theoretically, Sasuke could even ignite that rock with Amaterasu afterward, similar to what we see him do in the Storm games. Though I will admit that last part dips into headcanon just a bit. So while I wouldn't call Sasuke's gravity-based powers a win condition, at the very least they should be enough to restrict Akainu's movements until he tunnels out of Chibaku Tensei. Or they can just be used traditionally to attract and repel his attacks at will, which are both great options when dealing with an Admiral. Speaking of Rinnegan-based abilities though, we obviously have to bring up Sasuke's unique Rinnegan power, the Ameno Tijikara. For those unfamiliar, this technique allows Sasuke to instantly swap the positions of objects or people within his line of sight, including himself. This ability opens the door for all kinds of tactical plays. Sasuke can evade attacks by switching places with nearby objects, reposition enemies to catch them off guard, or even swap allies like Naruto into perfect striking range, making Ameno Tijikara a total game changer in virtually any fight involving Sasuke, especially this one. Now that Sasuke's abilities have been discussed, we can move on to Naruto, with his two most viable options for dealing with Akainu being his Truth-Seeking Orbs and his Magnet-Release Rasengan. Let's start with the Truth-Seeking Orbs. These orbs are explicitly stated and shown to erase anything they touch, and that includes beings like Edo Tensei, who are essentially souls bonded to sacrificial bodies. This not only allows the Edos to regenerate, but it also makes them immune to normal physical damage, meaning they function similarly to Logia users. Yet the Truth-Seeking Orb's level of durability negation was so high that it was able to affect the Edo Tensei souls directly. We know this is 100% true because when Minato departs for the afterlife, both of his arms, which had been erased by the Truth-Seeking Orbs earlier, don't travel with him, directly confirming that the Truth-Seeking Orbs don't just erase the body, they erase the soul. Meaning that if Akainu tries to rely on his Logia Intangibility to phase through the Truth-Seeking Orbs, then it's G's. Now as for the Magnet-Release Rasengan, it works a little differently, but it's just as effective. Instead of erasure, this jutsu relies on restricting the opponent's movements through sealing. So even though it doesn't hurt Akainu directly, it locks him down and renders him completely immobile, which is an auto loss for someone who relies so heavily on mobility and aggressive pressure. In other words, Naruto doesn't need to injure Akainu, he just needs to shut him down. And lucky for him, the Magnet-Release Rasengan does just that. Now, just because Naruto and Sasuke have unconventional ways to injure Akainu, doesn't mean he can't hurt them right back. Which is why next, we need to break down just how powerful Akainu really is, and what kind of threat he poses to the two strongest shinobi of all time. When it comes to scaling Akainu's strength, One Piece fans usually lean on two major interpretations, with the first and most infamous one being the statement of Whitebeard having the power to destroy the world. Somehow this has evolved into the idea that Whitebeard could literally blow up the planet King Vegeta style, with the usual arguments for this statement not being hyperbolic going as follows. 1. People claiming that since Sengoku fought Whitebeard in the past, he knows exactly what Whitebeard is capable of. Hence, the statement about Whitebeard's power can't be hyperbole. 2. Suru saying she could flee to the ends of the earth and still not escape Whitebeard. And 3, and finally, a random Grand Line Island feeling the effects of a Marineford quake despite likely being hundreds of kilometers away. Now, while these statements are great for hype and dramatic effect, they're not actual proof that Whitebeard is planetary. Why? Because even if you try to string these instances together to make a case for planet busting, at the end of the day there are no feats that back up that level of power. Furthermore, the statement itself doesn't even require a literal interpretation for it to still be true. The original Japanese term used is sekai, which in most contexts refers to the world of people or society, not the physical planet. With this interpretation making a lot more sense when you look at what we've actually seen Whitebeard pull off in terms of destructive ability. He's a threat to global civilization, not the Earth's crust and core. So no matter how you slice it, the idea that Whitebeard and by extension Akainu scales to planet, or god forbid star level, is just another case of anime fandoms twisting a line of dialogue to inflate their favorite character's power. Moving on to the second major One Piece strength meta, this one revolves around Danchin Zhao, a character who in the grand scheme of things is relatively weak compared to the true top tiers of the verse, yet people scale him all the way to continental levels of power because of one feat, splitting the ice continent with a single headbutt. Because of that one feat alone, some fans argue that Akainu and other top tiers must be multi-continental to planetary via upscaling. But that logic is absolutely broken. The reason why is because the kinetic energy required for Danchin Zhao to split that landmass isn't anywhere near close to continental. At best, and I mean at absolute best, it's large mountain level. Now I already know what a lot of you are thinking. How can this guy say that so confidently when it's literally called an ice continent? Especially when the One Piece world is so massive that places like Alabasta are said to rival Australia in size, making it possible that the ice continent is as big as the moon. And that mindset right there is the fucking problem. This idea that everything in One Piece deserves some massive size multiplier based on headcanon is pure fucking nonsense. You can't just take vague statements and run wild with them. That's not how proper size scaling works. Meaning no, you can't just inflate a feat's energy result because the One Piece world is big. You either need canon measurements or contextual evidence, which bringing up Alabasta's size relative to the average island in real life to upscale feats is completely devoid of. Now for fun, let's even entertain the idea that the ice continent is the same size as Antarctica, which is already a shaky assumption. If you calculate the kinetic energy required to split the continent in the manner he did, not destroy it, just to split it, you don't even reach continental levels. You land somewhere around large mountain level like I said before. That's the crucial point. You can't equate a clean split with total obliteration. Just like cutting a tree down doesn't mean you had the energy to vaporize the entire thing. It's a completely different energy threshold, and fans pretending otherwise are ignoring fundamental physics to inflate AP. So when people use Danchin Zhao's feat to scale top tiers to multi-continental or planetary levels, they're not using logic. They're repeating the same kind of hype-driven, context-ignoring thinking we already debunked with the Whitebeard meta. But Sage, if you don't subscribe to the two most common metas in One Piece, then how strong do you think Akainu actually is? Well, the answer is pretty straightforward. As I've explained in previous videos, characters like Base Luffy and Hybrid Kaido have showcased the ability to generate immense kinetic force, enough to split the sky itself when their attacks clash. These sky-splitting feats aren't just flashy visuals. They represent the displacement of cloud formations that are kilometers wide in a matter of seconds. When analyzed scientifically, the amount of energy required to part that volume of clouds at such speeds consistently yields results in the country level range. And this isn't some one-off calc. Nearly every serious sky split calculation available backs up that level of output. That's exactly why I view country level strength scaling as the most consistent and realistic metric for top tiers in One Piece. And when you consider that admirals like Kizaru are casually blocking those same hockey-coated blows with raw physical strength, it's safe to say that Akainu is easily country level in terms of AP and durability. Now that we've established the level of strength Akainu operates at, the next question becomes whether Naruto and Sasuke can actually take a hit from the Admiral, or if they'd end up like Ace when he faced him. Right off the bat, Naruto and Sasuke are at a disadvantage against Akainu's magma. Why? Because in Kaguya's lava dimension, it's made abundantly clear that falling into the lava means instant death. That's not a great look when you're up against someone who can produce magma attacks large enough to engulf both of them. But it's also important to remember that Akainu isn't the type to spam large AoE lava attacks immediately when facing single opponents. He typically prefers close-range combat, only using his massive techniques when necessary. So Naruto and Sasuke likely wouldn't be thrown into a pool of lava right away. They'd probably have to deal with Akainu's strikes directly, which they might be able to tank depending on their durability. However, even if they were in danger of getting smothered by magma, they could easily defend themselves by using their chakra avatars, which have already blocked intense heat-based attacks like the Amaterasu and Fireball Jutsu. So if we're being real, the lava weakness isn't really that big a deal when you consider their defenses. But just how durable are those defenses? That's the million-dollar question, and it's hard to answer without breaking it down meta by meta. Let's start with the classic statement from Hiruzen about Orochimaru having enough power to destroy a small country. Some people take that to mean Orochimaru has country-level AP, but that interpretation doesn't really hold up. First of all, we have no idea how big that small country is supposed to be. It could be a massive nation or just a slightly oversized village. There's no scale given, so assuming one is highly fallacious. Secondly, the method of destruction isn't explained. Is he leveling the country with a giant jutsu? Is it over the course of days, weeks, or in a single moment? There lies the problem. We just don't know. So why should we assume? Third and most importantly though, just like with the Whitebeard's statement, a literal interpretation isn't even required for it to be true. Orochimaru already did essentially destroy a small country, the Leaf Village, and he did it through infiltration, manipulation, and summoning allies. That's likely what Hiruzen meant, not that Orochimaru had enough raw attack power to erase a nation off the map. So no, that line doesn't give Orochimaru or any other character country level AP. And by that same logic, we shouldn't overhype other vague statements like Kurama reducing the world to ash, Obito destroying the world with the sword of Nunaboko, or Madara claiming his Susanoo can destroy all things in the universe. Those are just poetic and dramatic lines, not measurable feats. And before anyone says it, no, Parrot's multi-continental Biju Bomb calc does not prove that Kurama is planetary, and if you're still jacking this shit logic in 2025, I genuinely question your intelligence. I only say this because if you take a simple look at the calc, you'll realize that Parrot assumes Earth's curvature to estimate the explosion size, which widely inflates the result. This is despite the fact that we can clearly see the explosion is still relatively close in scale to the 8 and 9 tails, who are only around 20 meters tall. That means the explosion is large, but nowhere near the size required for Earth's curvature to be noticeable. Therefore, Parrot using the curvature of the Earth in this case massively overestimates the blast energy output and isn't supported by canon measurements, making the calc a horrible citation for an argument. With those metas out of the way though, I know a lot of you Naruto fans are probably eager to point out the fact that by the time Naruto and Sasuke unlock their god forms, that they should easily be on par with the likes of the Ten Tails, whose chakra is verbatim stated to be akin to a small planet. And even though I feel like it goes without saying, a lot of people seem to still not understand that sheer chakra amount is not the equivalent to strength. Otherwise, Naruto as early as the Land of Waves would be several times stronger than Kakashi, who self-admits that Naruto has more chakra than him. And while you could obviously argue that characters like Madara or Obito have perfect chakra control once becoming the Ten Tails Jinchuriki, the fact of the matter is that they haven't displayed the ability to infuse the entirety of the Ten Tails chakra into a single attack. So unless I missed something and they've actually demonstrated that they can infuse all of the Ten Tails chakra into one attack, then I think it's just pure headcanon to speculate that it's possible. While on the topic of the Ten Tails though, another notoriously bad meta people try to use to get Naruto and Sasuke to planet level is scaling them off Ten Tails Madara spreading the Divine Tree's roots, which pixel scalers have calced to require near planetary levels of energy to pull off. However, as I've said millions of times in my previous videos, the uncomfortable truth is that creation feats do not automatically equal AP in terms of fictional scaling. Since if you didn't know, there are tons of instances in media of characters having the ability to create things like objects or parallel worlds that technically take a ton of energy to generate from nothing. However, like I said with the Ten Tails chakra, unless one demonstrates the ability to manipulate that same creation energy into an attack of some sort, simply assuming they can is rather unlikely and slightly fallacious. With this same creation doesn't equal destruction logic also applying to feats such as Kaguya and Momoshiki creating parallel universes, or any Chibaku Tensei calcs that people like to reference as upscales. Also, if you thought Kaguya's internal truth-seeking orb was some kind of exception to this rule, you'd be absolutely wrong. Since just because Kaguya uses the Shinobi Alliance's chakra for the jutsu which she massively outscales, it doesn't change what the technique actually does on a fundamental level. since at its core, all the Eternal Truth-Seeking Orb is the erasure mechanics of a Truth-Seeker Orb scaled up to a dimensional level, meaning the jutsu is less like Kaguya firing off some massive Kamehameha and more like her hitting a nuke button, something automatic and passive rather than an active show of raw attack potency. Now that I've debunked all of the most common AP metas though, the last one I want to tear apart is this bizarre idea that just because 100 regular shinobi powered a chakra cannon to destroy the moon, that means Naruto, who can amp 100 shinobi with Kurama's chakra, must be operating well beyond that level. However, newsflash to anyone who clearly didn't watch Naruto the last, the chakra cannon doesn't actually destroy matter. It uses space-time ninjutsu to teleport the target to another dimension. The shinobi powering it weren't supplying some insane destructive force. They were just fuel to activate the cannon's jutsu. So no, the cannon doesn't scale to their AP. And yes, the fact that this even has to be explained makes me seriously question the reading comprehension of the Naruto fandom as a whole. But I digress. Now, even though a lot of you probably think I'm some hating bitch, I actually don't mind giving Naruto credit when it makes sense. The only reason I spent time tearing down all those metas is because when I go over mine, I don't want anyone to bring up why I'm downplaying or forgot other AP scales that would have Naruto and Sasuke higher. As in all reality, I have zero investment in who wins this versus matchup, and am simply trying to explain why going by my meta that accounts for narrative, on-screen feats, and consistent calculations is the best form of evaluation for Naruto and Sasuke's strength. And if you ask me, the feat with the best mix of all of these is easily the time Naruto pulverized several of Madara's meteorites with his 6 Biju Rasen shurikens. If you properly pixel scale these meteorites using Naruto's cannon height as reference while comparing it to his Rasen shurikens, and then adjust the energy yield based on the pulverization of the planetoid's volume, then the energy required to pull off this feat easily exceeds country level per Rasen shuriken. Now some of you are probably thinking, hey, didn't Sage say Biju bombs can't be used to scale AP because of the energy dispersion from explosions? Which is a great observation. But no, I'm not being inconsistent with this take. I still believe that just because Naruto's Rasen shurikens produce country level explosive results doesn't automatically mean it scales to country level AP. That being said, it doesn't even matter. Because the reason these Biju Bomb Rasen shurikens do scale to Naruto's AP is that once he befriends Kurama and perfects their link, he gains the ability to compress that Biju Bomb power into the size of a Rasengan, solving the energy dispersion and potency problems that plague normal Biju Bombs entirely. And since Sasuke can easily withstand or counter these attacks with his Chidori or Susanoo, and Naruto can do the same thing in return, it means that even if Akainu were to land a clean hit on either of them without Kurama or Susanoo, it'd probably be more painful than it would be lethal. However, even with that being the case, it's arguable Akainu doesn't even need his Devil Fruit to damage Naruto or Sasuke, since he can just as easily rely on his mastery of armament haki, which is very akin to the art of Ryo used on Wano that's used to attack opponents' internal organs. With this being a major threat to both Naruto and Sasuke, as Naruto characters are flat out just stated to be unable to strengthen their organs, giving them no resistance against Akainu if he uses armament haki. Now that I've gone over Naruto, Sasuke, and Akainu completely though, the last thing to go over is the conclusion. And if you've been following along, you'll know that I've established that Naruto, Sasuke, and Akainu can all damage each other in various ways, and are also relative in speed. However, the huge equalizer in this matchup is that Naruto and Sasuke's attacks are arguably more lethal and trickier to deal with than the Admiral's. On top of that, Akainu has never faced abilities like Amaterasu, Chibaku Tensei, Truth-Seeking Orbs, or sealing techniques like the Magnet Release Rasengan. And it doesn't get much better going on the offensive for Akainu either, because as strong as he is, he's still relative to both base Naruto and Sasuke in strength, and would likely struggle to get past their chakra avatar's defenses, with Sasuke even having the ability to coat his in Amaterasu like I mentioned before. And that's without even mentioning the other insane things Akainu would have to deal with, like fighting 1,000 shadow clones, being transported all across the battlefield by space-time ninjutsu, and dealing with Naruto and Sasuke's insane precognitive reactions. Meanwhile, all Akainu really has to counter this is advanced armament haki and his inconsistent use of observation haki. And even if Akainu somehow manages to mortally wound or kill one of them, it still wouldn't guarantee his victory. Naruto has shown he can regenerate from complete destruction of internal organs, and Sasuke can use Izanagi to rewrite reality and basically force a round 2. Furthermore, this is all without even bringing up Sasuke's genjutsu, which despite popular belief, should work in a cross-verse setting. This is because Mangekyo Sharingan users are able to bypass the typical requirements of manipulating an opponent's own chakra by directly injecting their chakra into the victim's nervous system. This would sidestep the usual genjutsu rules entirely, as the Naruto series only ever states that genjutsu works by manipulating chakra inside someone's body, not that you specifically need a chakra pathway system for it to work. Therefore, yes, Akainu would be susceptible to genjutsu. So to summarize things, while Akainu is physically capable of competing with either Naruto or Sasuke in a one-on-one fight, it's their sheer versatility and hacks that gives them the edge, even without needing to team up. But once you combine the two of them, it's safe to say that Akainu doesn't stand a chance.